Welcome to this webinar, which has been organised by Adfree Cities as part of Ethical Consumer Week 2023. I'll just say a few words about who we are before introducing our speakers. I'm Charlotte Gage, Network Director at Adfree Cities, and Adfree Cities is concerned with the impacts of outdoor advertising on our well-being, environment, health, climate, and local economies. We support a network of groups around the UK working to keep their public spaces ad-free. We showcase positive alternatives to outdoor advertising, like art and nature. We work with councils to introduce policies restricting harmful advertising, and we lobby for change at the national level as well. We work to expose the ways in which advertising works, so looking at the tactics of corporate advertising so that we can understand them, resist their influence, and collectively create public spaces that prioritise people and nature rather than corporate profit. Our latest strand of work looks at the tactics of meat, egg, and dairy advertising, and we're really glad you can join us for this webinar and discussion today where we'll be talking about that. So now I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Professor Aaron Stibbe. So Aaron is a Professor of Ecological Linguistics at the University of Gloucestershire. He has an academic background in both linguistics and human ecology and combines the two in his research and teaching. He's the founder of the International Eco-Linguistics Association and is author of 2 books on eco-linguistics and eco-narratives. He was awarded a National Teaching Fellowship by the Higher Education Academy for Teaching Excellence and has published widely on eco-linguistics. So Aaron, over to you for your presentation.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to be talking with you today. And if you just give me a moment, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about animal product advertising and just looking at some of the techniques that the meat industry uses to convince people to buy a product that is incredibly harmful to animals and is also very ecologically destructive. But firstly, why analyze animal product advertising? And I want to start with this quote from Ayana Young, who's an ecological journalist. She says, we need to see what advertising uses. What does the dominant culture use to seduce us? And why are we not using these tools to seduce other people in another direction? Can we look at what does work and actually utilize these tools with integrity, with love, with devotion for a greater good, and also be creative, make art, and have a fun time while doing it? So that's just a superb way of looking at this. So we look at the tools that the meat industry is using, and we resist those tools, but we also use the tools to do something that can persuade people to have more healthy, sustainable, and kinder food choices. So I did a project for Greenpeace, and I analyzed a vast range of meat advertising for them to help them to inform their campaign. And it ended up contributing to this document, which looks at the 7 myths of big meat's marketing. So these myths are the green myth, that meat is good for you myth, the masculinity myth, the good woman myth, national identity myth, the human togetherness myth, and the freedom myth. And so we'll just have a look at some of the examples that I was looking at when I was writing my report for Greenpeace. And so this is my report that I produced. And if you're interested, I'm very happy to send you a copy of this. So the first is a kind of a framing. And so this is the framing that industrial agriculture is a family farm. There's lots of variations of this, but just pretending that it's a kind, nice place where the animals are looked after beautifully. And there's all kinds of triggers which show this, these images of the ideal family farm. And it's often represented as the red farmhouse surrounded by fields, and it's as if these are coming from like individual small units. So Tesco's uses these brands, Woodside Farms, Boswell Farms, Willow Farms. And actually I did a little bit of investigation, and that Willow Farm chicken, it sounds like it's from a family farm, but actually some of that Willow Farm chicken is repurposed from leftover little chicken, which is quite shocking. So obviously this is a fiction. There is no actual little family farm behind it. And then eating meat is masculine, and there's all kinds of triggers for this, triggers of power and pickup trucks and SUVs and muscles and strength and aggression and violence and weapons, sexualized and submissive women. There's all kinds of images out there which just suggest that meat is masculine. And then this idea that meat is a path to love. So this is a Knorr advertisement where a couple meet for the first time and they bond by feeding each other bits of meat with their hands. It's absolutely disgusting what they're doing. But yeah, and they fall in love over a meaty meal. There they are. And then is the good woman myth. And, you know, the good woman cooks the Sunday roast. And it's this roast that brings the family together into a loving relationship. And love is obviously something very powerful for selling products. You know, and we can use this in counter advertising, that it's possible for people to bond and find love eating a meal which doesn't require a third party to spend their entire life in a cage. So my work with Greenpeace led to this campaign, and less meat, more veggies, more plants, more forests, more water, more health, more taste, more life. And this framing of more is actually quite important, because if you just stopped at less meat, that sounds like you've got something less in your life. So framing things in terms of the positive pole of more is quite important. So if we can use what we're going to get is more, we're going to get a better life. We're not just like sacrificing something that we like. And then recently I wrote this book called Eco-Narrative, and in there I explore different types of advertising. So the classic type, identity type, narrative type, cause type, counter type. Can't say very much about them today, but I'll just give the bare bones of this. So the classic type advertising, it shows you the product. It talks about the properties of the product, how fantastic the product is, how, you know, delicious it is. And it just talks very specifically about the product, representing it in a favorable light. And then it ends with a call like, buy our product. And so this is classic advertising. But there's this issue of stake. So not this kind of stake, S-T-A-K-E, where obviously the corporation has an agenda in selling you something. So why would we believe them when they say that their product is so, you know, delicious and wonderful? And then we got the classic type advertising again, and this is where they're showing the animals that are producing the food and saying how happy the animals are, and maybe they're running around, you know, playing football, and just showing that what wonderful lives that they have. But again, this is still showing the animals, and often people don't want to be reminded that the food that they're eating comes from animals. And obviously this is telling a lie. This is like the beneficial family farm framing again. And this is an actual anchor farm where the animals are not outside happily eating. And here's another anchor farm. So Kathy Green talks about these advertisements with the speaking animals selling the end products of the brutal processes they endure in the factory farm system serve a dual discursive purpose. First purpose is to sell products, and the second role is to make the animal victims disappear. So representing the happy animals partly makes them disappear, but it still reminds you that it comes from an animal. Whereas more modern advertisements work more on identity. So this is identity type advertisements like this one.
What's more American than a cheeseburger? This cheeseburger, loaded with a hot dog and potato chips. In the hands of all-American model Samantha Hoops. In a hot tub. In a pickup truck, driven by an American bull rider. On an aircraft carrier. Under the gaze of Lady Liberty.
So this is meat as a form of national identity, that if you eat these burgers, you are a true American. And this is just a way of ignoring the slaughterhouses and the conditions the animals are facing, just erasing all of that and just represented as if you eat this product, you are this kind of person.
What's more,
And sometimes these films can be extremely elaborate. And this is a lamb advert. I won't show it to you because it's very long. A lamb advert which uses a particular genre of war film, an extraction war film where people go into enemy territory and rescue people. Except this time they're rescuing these poor Australians who are stranded abroad without any lamb to eat. And the soldiers crash into people's houses and rescue all of these Australians. And here's right now, there's thousands of Australians stranded overseas with no chance of eating lamb on Australia Day. In a few hours, you'll be eating lamb on the beach, but I'm vegan now, the guy says. And then they torch his flat. So he's like representing a very weak kind of vegan, and he's not really Australian, this guy. So he doesn't have the national identity of being Australian because he's vegan and deserving to have his flat burned down. And when people complained about this advertisement, the Advertising Standards Bureau noted that the overall tone and theme of the advertisement is intended to be humorous, it's exaggerated and unrealistic, so therefore it's not real depictions of violence. And so when advertisers use narrative to convey their message, they can get away with saying things which are untrue or are violent or are distasteful. It's like, oh, we're only joking, or it's just fantasy. And Haagen-Dazs used this narrative about love to sell their ice cream in Taiwan, even though 88% of people in Taiwan are lactose intolerant, as well as ice cream being made of dairy products, which are incredibly cruel for the cows and environmentally destructive. And then we got counter advertising. So finally, this is where we use the advertising techniques of the big corporations, but use it to get people not to buy something because it's environmentally harmful. And this is an example from Greenpeace. I'll just show you a moment of it.
Is here to feast. Those, please. Feed for chickens, pigs, and cows to sell more meat to you. As our forest disappeared, their evil empire grew. They think they're...
So this is, again, is using narrative and disembedding it from like children's stories and using it in this quite apocalyptic way to blame corporations for the terrible environmental damage that is caused by the production of meat. So we can use the techniques of the advertisers to create counter advertisements, which can try and oppose the destruction caused by the meat industry. And that's where I got to stop. Okay, thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks so much, Aaron. So, sorry, lost my spot. So now I'd like to introduce Nicola Round, who is our Outreach Director at Adfree Cities, and is leading our new strand of work looking at the tactics of meat, egg and dairy advertising. But before Nicola speaks, we'd like to show you a little short video that we've made around this work. Hopefully it will work. It's been a little bit sticky this morning, so apologies if you can't quite hear or see it, but you will be able to also view it on our YouTube channel and on our website. So James, are you able to play that?
Yeah, sure. Just give me 1 second.
Cheese, milk, meat, eggs. This is where it all comes from, right? The farm we all like to believe in, a natural home for happy animals living their best lives. But this dreamlike world only exists in storybooks and adverts. Dancing chickens, laughing cows, happy eggs. Posy adverts for animal products are everywhere, on our school run, our commutes, on our socials. Most animals farmed in the UK are not living lives fit for storybooks. Over 3/4 are living in factory farms, intensively reared in cramped conditions and then killed. behind the billboards, this industry is also polluting our soils and our rivers, wiping out wildlife and driving climate breakdown. Advertising tells us the story that we want to hear, leaving out the cruelty and destruction. It distracts us with stories of small farms and cartoon animals, and taps into our emotions using heartwarming music and family themes. When we're surrounded by these messages, it's easy to feel like eating meat isn't a problem. But with more than 1,000 mega farms now in the UK, the ethical, environmental and health consequences are a big problem. The cows definitely aren't laughing, the chickens aren't dancing, and there's no such thing as happy eggs. Our understanding of the life cycle of what we eat is bought and paid for by an industry determined to keep us eating and not learning. So, what can we do about it? Getting rid of the advertising noise that's pushing us in the wrong direction is essential to create space for a different story, a kinder, fairer food system. People around the UK are stopping outdoor advertising, cutting out big brand ads and reclaiming space for art, nature, or just space to think. This is happening. The city of Haarlem in the Netherlands has already banned meat adverts altogether. Could a UK city be next? Our local councils have the power to restrict harmful advertising. Many are already taking action against ads for gambling, junk food, or polluting products like SUVs. Adverts that promote the destructive factory farming industry have no place in our cities either. It's time to take down corporate ads and make space for the things that really matter.
Okay, over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I'm just going to get my screen. How's that looking? Yeah. Great. Yes, thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, Aaron. I do recommend checking out Aaron's books and also his online course on eco-narratives, which is really good, worth checking out. Okay, so picture this. This for a typical commute to work. You leave your home in the morning to walk to the bus stop. At the end of your road, as you walk towards the end, you can't avoid looking at this giant billboard that faces you. It's advertising Tesco supermarkets on a huge stake. Walking along, you pass more billboards. You pass this one with a giant pasty spilling out meaty chunks. And then the next website, you pass, it's December. So this one has a laughing woman carving a turkey with her family laughing joyfully on. And then waiting for the bus, you stand beside an advert for a fried chicken wrap at a tantalizingly low price. And just opposite, there's another advert for a burger. And then you get on the bus, and on the bus, you pass this absolutely gigantic digital billboard with a huge Subway sandwich filled with meat. This might well be something similar to your own experience. It certainly is similar to, you know, the daily experience of many people. And that's before we factor in the ads you see on your social media feed, on the news websites you visit. How does this all make you feel? What's happening with your subconscious experience as well as your conscious experience? And what's the cumulative effect of all of this? We'll come back to that a little bit later. So our goal with Adfree Cities is to reduce and ultimately remove corporate advertising from our public spaces. There are lots of reasons to dislike billboards, digital screens and bus stop ads. They're intrusive, they're distracting. This kind of advertising is undermining local economies. It causes light pollution, which is very harmful to wildlife and to people. Digital screens are also extremely energy intensive. And you can read about more about all these issues on our website. Importantly for this discussion, these sites, these outdoor advertising sites, are platforms for big brands to sell us products that we don't need, that are harming the planet: cars, junk food, fast fashion, and they're selling them in increasingly manipulative ways. Advertising serves to keep us consuming, despite the colossal damage that overconsumption is doing. And nowhere is this more true than with advertising for the products of the factory farming industry, for meat, eggs, and dairy. And so that's why we wanted to explore this issue. And that's why we launched this new guide as a sort of start to this work. We wanted to look at what Aaron's been talking about, the stories that we're told by advertising versus the reality. We knew that advertising that features laughing cows and happy chickens is hiding in grim reality for factory farmed animals. But the tactics go much further than simply covering up the story. I'm just going to build a little bit on what Aaron started to talk about by looking at some of the tactics that we look at in this guide. So firstly, we do look at how advertising keeps the secrets of the factory farming industry. So we never have to see the lives, the conditions of the animals who become our food. And adverts are reinforcing this lack of knowledge and awareness. Where they do show farmed animals, like in milk or egg adverts, they're extremely selective in what they show. These images beneath are taken from a PT UK investigation into a supplier of happy eggs. The reality is very, very different from what we're shown in adverts. We're never shown the important aspects of intensively farming animals. So if we think adverts are helping us make a choice, it's actually the opposite. They are preventing us from making an informed choice. If you know anything about the process of extracting cow's milk, you'll know that the cow on this enormous digital screen has an experience that is very different from these adverts. The adverts are leaving out the most important aspects of her experience. We're left with this impression of a happy cow in a green field living this lovely, relaxed life. Just want to talk about objectification as well. So by representing animals as cartoons, as objects to be used and consumed, adverts are devaluing their lives. They're justifying their oppression, their exploitation. This has been done for decades, and the familiar laughing cow is a really good example of that. And she's really weird as well. She's upright, she's kind of feminine and flirtatious. She's also udderless. The feminist writer Carol Adams and also the social psychologist Melanie Joy, they compare this oppression of other animals called speciesism to the patriarchy. So patriarchy has been around for hundreds of years, hiding in plain sight. But when feminists named it, we were able to start seeing it and dismantling it. And we can do the same with speciesism that we see in adverts and elsewhere in our culture. Okay, I just want to come back to normalization. This comes back to our commute to work. Advertising is all around us. It has a very powerful normalizing effect. It shapes our culture, it shapes our expectations, and it shapes what we perceive to be normal. So that's why getting rid of this advertising would be such an important step and help clear the way for rethinking what we eat. Government, surprisingly, doesn't help here. The government actively funds marketing campaigns to increase consumption of meat and dairy, like this one from 2020. This is a government-funded marketing campaign which appeals to values of connection to increase sales of cow's milk. And just lastly, to mention again, nostalgia. Aaron's touched on this as well. We're all familiar. We grew up with books about these happy farms where there's one chicken, one pig, one duck. They're all living really happily together with no mention of why they're there or the fact that they're going to die. And adverts paint that same picture for us. They keep us in that sort of cozy, reassuring story so we don't question it. This key tactic of making us feel that these products have come from family farms just simply isn't true. The reality is that the dominance of these huge multinational meat, egg and dairy companies is leaving genuine small farmers with less independence, with fewer options, often pushing them towards intensification. And actually workers in the meat industry, thousands of workers in the meat industry, often endure very poor conditions and low pay. Just to mention as well, greenwashing and humane washing, we go into this more in our recent guide. Adverts and packaging commonly lead us to believe that animals confined and killed are somehow treated compassionately, or that meat and dairy products are beneficial to the environment, when the opposite is invariably true. And this is a real Burger King advert for their low methane Whopper, which was just found to be total greenwash, as you can imagine. Okay. I will stop showing hideous pictures of meat advertising soon, I promise. This one is particularly hideous and worth showing, I thought. So what we eat is closely connected to our identity and culture. So this is a sensitive and quite difficult issue to explore. And there's this question of choice as well. People don't want to be told what to eat. And governments say that they don't want to tell people what to eat. But of course they do by funding campaigns to increase milk consumption. And as we said before, Adverts are influencing our choice, heavily influencing our choices every day, often without us really being aware. Meat, egg and dairy industries are extremely powerful. They have a great deal of influence on policymakers. They lobby heavily against any efforts to reform the food system. And they receive huge subsidies from government, who are very unwilling to take any action, any meaningful action to reduce production, like stopping subsidies or changing land use. But ending advertising for meat, eggs and dairy is possible, and would go a long way to reducing demand. Do you remember sites like this? Tobacco advertising was banned because we knew how harmful it was. And there are growing calls to ban adverts for high carbon products. We could ban meat advertising nationally too. As we said in the video, the city of Haarlem in the Netherlands has banned meat advertising. It is possible. There's even more and more immediate potential at the local level. We work with local councils to introduce policies to restrict harmful advertising, like alcohol and gambling and junk food. These advertising policies that councils are bringing in, they could include restrictions on meat, dairy and egg advertising too. And it works. So research following a ban on junk food advertising on the TfL network found that these restrictions have prevented almost 100,000 cases of obesity, thousands of cases of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and could save the NHS 200 million. So restrictions on advertising works. Another thing that we can do is to challenge misleading advertising. So we've talked about how advertising is reinforcing systems of oppression. Advertising has historically reinforced racism and sexism, but today we see much less of this in adverts. And the regulator, the ASA, has guidelines on racial and gender stereotyping in adverts. ASA codes, they don't currently cover the representation of farmed animals in adverts. So speciesism is an area where advertising still has much more freedom. But this can change. By complaining about adverts, we can encourage the ASA to take action against them. And we have successfully done this against greenwashing ads by Shell, by HSBC, and these kind of actions can lead to ASA introducing stronger codes. Another thing that we can do is to work to create ad-free places. So ad block groups around the UK, of which there are a growing number working in cities, they oppose outdoor advertising, they prevent new digital advertising sites. And when you consider that the top spender on outdoor advertising by far is McDonald's, with KFC not far behind, stopping new outdoor advertising sites means a lot of meat ads prevented. Ad block groups also run projects like this, where they make space for art instead of advertising. This piece of art, this artwork, celebrates local food. So do get involved in your local ad block group, but we can support you to start your own. And just finally, some artists and campaigners simply install their own counter messages in ad spaces, which can also be extremely effective. So that's the beginnings of the work that we've been doing, and a few ideas and some inspiration. This is a really new area for us, and one we do want to work on more in future. Our main goal with this at the moment is to have a conversation. So we're really interested to hear your ideas, your challenges about this, and potential for collaboration as well. And that's it from me. Thank you. Get in touch.
Great, thank you, Nicola. So now we're going to go to our final speaker today, Natalie Brain. So Natalie leads on narrative research with Animal Think Tank. She's involved in a long-term narrative research project looking at how communications can persuade different segments of society that animal freedom is an urgent social issue. She gathers hope and inspiration from other movements and campaigns that have helped to change the narrative and in turn change society for the better. So Natalie, do you want to start your presentation?
Yeah, hi everyone, really excited to be here. I'm just going to share my screen and give me a shout if people can't see this. Okay, so I work for Animal Think Tank, and we're a little bit different in that we see ourselves as more of a think and do tank. So we're really trying to put our research into practice through launching our own campaigns and directly supporting other campaigns like this one. I'm involved in the narrative research team, so that's looking at how we change attitudes about other animals to build public support and also pressure for greater rights and freedoms for animals. So we're doing a lot of public testing of messages and stories and really trying to examine like what kind of messages and stories, whether they're reinforcing helpful or harmful narratives about other animals and also our relationship with them. So as both Aaron and Nicola have mentioned, the industry knows that people kind of care about animals. The UK often kind of touts itself as being a nation of animal lovers, and most people do care about animals and their well-being. And the animal agriculture industry knows this, and it capitalizes on people's compassion and empathy to sell products that in reality involve immense suffering. So the animal freedom movement is really great at pulling back the curtain on the industry's marketing lies by showing the reality that the billions of animals who are farmed have to endure every day. And I mean, these images are obviously very upsetting, but they're really only the PG version of what's going on. And there have been some really great ads that expose the deceit of the industry, urging people to not buy the lie or these products. But we do need to go beyond just individual change and boycotting certain products and push for system change too, which is why this campaign is so important. There's a theory of how social change happens, which really involves three key elements. And one of those is creating alternatives. So that would be things like cruelty-free and plant-based products and vegan products. Sanctuaries that house animals, community billboards like Nicola was talking about. And then there's obviously individual transformation. So that's changing what we buy, how we live our lives, and even changing our worldviews. And then there's changing institutions. So that's putting pressure on corporations and industries, governments, and even changing laws as well. And we really build support for all of these through the stories we tell. And a big part of our research at Animal Think Tank is learning from other social movements and campaigns that change the narrative to create real world change. And I'm going to briefly talk about three movements and campaigns that are really inspiring. So Nicola has already mentioned how tobacco ads were banned because of the harm that tobacco causes. And a really interesting campaign linked to this issue is one that transformed youth smoking in America, which is known as the Truth Campaign. Just some quick stats. So in 2000, 23% of teenagers in America smoked, 23%. And by 2019, so just 19 years later, only 5% smoked. And the Truth Campaign was really key to this in America. So they did extensive public testing with American teens, their target audience, to find out what resonated with them on this issue. And the thing they cared a lot about, understandably, was their public image to their peers. So researchers understood that a big part of their campaign was reframing what was cool. So the campaign worked uncool because they found through their public research that teenagers felt this is something only adults would say. So as well as tapping into teenagers' aspirational identities about being cool, their communications also spoke to young people's desire to be independent and take control over their lives by rebelling against a harmful industry, as you can see in some of these ads here. And the campaign really quite strategically turned the stereotype of smoking as this symbol of youthful independence on its head. And they also used humour to great effect to make the ads stand out to their audience. The campaign highlighted the harm that smoking can cause, linking it with other issues that teenagers are concerned about, like mental and physical health. And just its name, the campaign's name of Truth, set it at odds with the tobacco industry. So rather than saying they were anti-tobacco, Truth, by naming themselves as Truth, framed the industry as anti-truth by deceiving young people about the harms of smoking and robbing them of their health and independence by getting them addicted to cigarettes and to vapes. So that was very strategic and powerful. And the campaign also highlighted how the tobacco industry was intentionally targeting and harming young people. So rather than framing teenagers who smoked as socially irresponsible, they framed the industry as socially irresponsible. And the Truth Campaign is obviously still ongoing because the industry is very powerful and continues to target teens to vape and smoke. But this campaign really shows the power of changing the narrative from one of individual responsibility to industry accountability. and researching to really understand what resonates with your audience and speaking to their aspirational identities. So I think there's a lot we can take away from campaigns like this. So yeah, the Truth campaign was really good at putting the tobacco industry in the spotlight and holding them accountable rather than blaming teen smokers. And this is an effective strategy, especially pushing for corporate or industry change. Another powerful strategy to get people to connect with an issue in a new way is to speak to shared values. And the next two movements I briefly talk about will really showcase that. So one interesting example is the Together for Yes campaign to repeal the Irish abortion ban, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. Obviously, the movement has been labelled pro-choice for a long time. Pivot, because they found that framing this as an individual issue about choice, they realised that they needed to gain kind of public support by framing it as a societal issue, and that this was actually rooted in shared values of care, compassion, and change. So they intentionally avoided the word choice because public research showed that people understood this term as something quite frivolous, almost choosing like what type of coffee you were going to order rather than a huge life decision. So they found that speaking to shared values of care and compassion really resonated for people in a way that choice didn't, in much the same way that the Truth campaign about independence spoke to their teenage audience. And like the Truth campaign, again, these shared values also tapped into people's aspirational identities, this time wanting to be seen as caring and compassionate, and more widely for Ireland to be seen as that too. And another successful campaign, which again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this time in America, which really speaks to values and aspirational identities, is Freedom to Marry, which is a huge inspiration for us at Animal Think Tank. So they initially, in their communications, they framed this issue as gay marriage, and they focused on rights and justice and even tax breaks. And unsurprisingly, this didn't resonate with the US public, who continually voted no on the issue. And a well-respected US pollster even told campaigners, you'll never see gay marriage in your lifetime. So rather than give up, they did public research and they discovered their own communications were preventing people from connecting with this in a deep way. So they realized they needed to reframe the issue as something that affected American society rather than just gay people. So they began to use the term marriage equality rather than gay marriage. And they also started to use the word freedom rather than rights, because that connected with people in a deeper way too. So yeah, like I said, they started moving away from talking about rights, justice, and even tax breaks to talking about the heart-held reasons that most people marry, which is love and commitment. And these shared values was something that the majority of America did resonate with. And they also tapped into people's aspirational identities by showing ads that featured everyday people, including conservative and religious people, talking about how they had changed their mind about marriage equality and why they care about this issue, helping people to understand why America should care about this issue. And within 11 years of reframing their communications, they have won the freedom to marry in all 50 US states after being told they'd never see it in their lifetime. And this is an international campaign that continues to win marriage equality in many countries all over the world. And I think this idea of shared values, I mean, Aaron was talking earlier about the values that the animal agriculture industry uses in their ads, and they really speak to love and community. Like, they know that values like this really connect with people. So I think we need to be doing the same in our own communications. So the Truth campaign, Together for Yes, and Freedom to Marry have all been successful because they invested in public research to find out the answers to some questions such as these. What are the values we share that will resonate? Values are being violated, and how do we frame who is responsible? How do we appeal to people's aspirations about themselves and encourage them to see themselves as part of the solution to bring about change? And how do we persuasively communicate that this change will benefit all of us? And all of these are questions we need to be thinking about when we communicate the need to end outdoor advertising of harmful products like factory farm food. I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the persuasive narratives we found in our own public research at Animal Think Tank. So to identify narratives that persuaded people, we used a process called message testing. And we came up with a lot of different messages, pinning on lots of different narratives. Participants either read our message or watched it as a video and then answered a questionnaire. And we found that these 3 narratives were more likely to result in people saying they would sign a petition to end factory farming. So the first one, which was most persuasive, was this narrative around animal abilities. So that animals have awe-inspiring abilities, they have intelligence, they have rich inner lives. So these are kind of stories and messages that really highlight how animals have the ability to feel joy, love, fear, frustration, and loneliness, just like we do. And then the next one was social progress. And it's the idea that animal freedom, or whatever kind of issue we're working on, this is the next step in our progress as a society. And it really communicates that positive change is inevitable, and references previous change we've made as a society to kind of inspire hope in people and to motivate people. And then the last narrative we found, which was persuasive also, was morality. This idea that it's morally right for us to support animal freedom, or whatever issue we're working on. And it's always framed in the positive, that it's morally right for us to do this as a society, to support a certain change, like ending factory farming or advertising of these products, rather than a negative, like you are morally wrong for eating meat, dairy and eggs. And that's obviously something we saw in the Truth campaign, that they avoided individual shaming, really kind of it was about accountability of the industry, but kind of speaking to morality as well. So whether it's using the weight of truth to take on powerful industries like tobacco and exposing their deceit, or using the power of shared values and aspirational identities to persuade people to support previously controversial issues, such as repealing abortion bans or enacting marriage equality, even change that seems impossible is possible. So I hope this talk has inspired people to realise that banning outdoor advertising of products that harm animals, the planet and people is within our reach. And I think this is a campaign that we should be really excited about and really unite behind, and of course, be intentional in how we communicate this issue. So if you'd like to find out more about the work we're doing at Animal Think Tank, this is our website, or you can email the narrative team at this address. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Natalie. Yeah, thanks to all our speakers today. So we've had a few questions in the chat. So what I'll do is I'll just go through those, direct them at the people they were directed specifically at. And then if we've got time, then hopefully we can open up to a few more questions potentially. But also feel free to put any questions in the chat while we're going through these ones. Okay, so the first one was from Charlotte at Eating Better to Aaron. And she asks, how have you seen this identity advertising play out in the UK? So Eating Better have done research with centre-right audiences, and a big part of the resistance to less meat is around tradition and a lack of knowledge in terms of cooking. And someone else actually pointed out that the argument is often that people dislike vegetables. So yeah, Aaron, have you got any response to that?
Yeah, well, sometimes it's quite hard to disengage, what's happening in the UK from what's happening elsewhere, because of the big multinationals, and their advertisements are kind of everywhere. So it's quite an international discourse. But I think the tradition aspect is quite strong in the UK, and this representation of meat as being part of being British, the Sunday roast, the fish and chips, the roast beef, the Cornish pasties, there's such a strong association between meat and being British. So that's clearly something that we need to tackle. And obviously we've got the British values of being animal lovers. And so we could perhaps work on that aspect of British identity. Like, if we really loved animals, we wouldn't be doing this to them. Yeah, so when I'm analyzing these adverts, like I say, it's really hard to pinpoint which country they're from, but I think some specific UK research would be very valuable.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, we've got a question from Chris to Nicola about the Harlem meat advertising ban. They were just a bit confused. Has it actually been banned? They said, I heard they were still discussing how to do it, and they were also looking to keep a place for this idea of better meat and dairy. but they did ban one misleading meat industry ad. Do you have any further information about that, Nicola? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking for clarification about that. That's a good point. They voted to ban meat advertising, and it is set to be, the ban is set to be enforced from 2024, so next year. And that's when it should happen. I'm not sure about the better meat and dairy. We could look into that. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. But yeah, you're right that the ban hasn't come into force just yet. It's set to do so next year. That's our understanding.
And another question for you, Nicola, from Julia, saying, I need support to get my council on board. My local councillor is too busy dealing with local issues, and also a point that her local councillor is married to a Welsh farmer. So maybe that doesn't help either. Any tips?
Getting our local council on board, yes. No, we'd love to support you with doing that, and we have done so with residents and with councillors and community groups in other cities as well. We've got plenty of resources on our website about engaging councils on introducing restrictions on harmful forms of advertising. Although everywhere is different, and what we find is that there are different arrangements around councils and which councils have responsibility, for example, for bus stop advertising, where that sits. Sometimes it's at the sort of local council level, sometimes it's at the unitary authority level. So we would just need to look into the kind of, or help you to look into the details of that local situation. But we would very much like to help you to do that, and getting your local councillor who's married to a Welsh farmer on board sounds like an interesting challenge, a good challenge. Anything else to add to that, Charlotte? That's actually more your area of work, but I guess the answer is yes. We do have a lot of resources to support you in doing that, and we've seen several councils now introducing restrictions on other types of harmful advertising. I would say, just to be honest, meat and dairy and egg advertising is probably going to be more of a challenge, because there is this cultural, this real cultural kind of issue around what we eat in meat particularly. But I think that this is the direction that we're going in, and yes, absolutely, definitely possible to get councils to restrict harmful advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing, because of the success with the TfL ban for junk food advertising, that's sort of seen now by councils as a bit easier, because they've seen it done elsewhere. So that if that can come in, then more can be added into that as well. So yeah, it will become more normalized as that is becoming more normalized. Okay, there's a question. Oh, we have lost it. Oh, from Tom to Natalie. So Tom says, animal advertising feels like a crucial signal issue. This advertising is necessary in order to normalise the violence of animal agriculture. It provides cover for us to suppress awareness of the horror of their production, but it also facilitates us in suspending feelings of empathy in other spheres. So, for example, social psychological studies show that speciesism, as Nicola was talking about, the objectification of animals as demand by the meat dairy industry, predicts racism. That's really interesting. So what are the prospects for encouraging groups who may not be focused on the direct environmental animal freedom impacts of animal agriculture to support your campaigning in recognition of these wider impacts? So Natalie, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, great question. And hey, Tom, nice to see you here. Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I think that kind of comes down to how we kind of communicate that this is something that would benefit everyone. And yeah, I guess highlighting the need for public research to kind of understand people's anxieties, because, you know, different groups and demographics and psychographics are going to have different anxieties around this, and there's going to be kind of different opportunities and leverage points. But yeah, I think it is communicating that this is something that benefits all of us. And like Aaron said, communicating this is something that we gain. It's not about something that we lose. And I guess like the Truth campaign, like highlighting that this is deceitful what this industry is doing, and none of us like to think we're being hoodwinked, as it were. So yeah, I guess speaking to values that kind of resonate for all of us around truth, around, like, you know, our natural care for other animals. Yeah, so lots of research to be done, but I think there's a lot of things that yeah, kind of really stand in our favour already.
Yeah, and I would add that it is an intersectional issue, that the different forms of oppression are very much woven together. And just one example, if you look at where these junk food advertisements are being put up, they're not being put up in the rich part of town, they're being put up in the poorer areas. And they're specifically targeting people on low incomes who already suffer terrible health inequalities. So that kind of intersectional aspect of, these advertisements are harming the animals, but they're also harming the people, and specifically harming the populations who are already disadvantaged by health inequality. So just wrapping the issues together is really good.
Thanks for that, Aaron. And just a quick plug, we actually have some research coming out soon which looks at exactly that, how the placement of billboards intersects with social disadvantage. So yeah, look out for that. Okay, I just got a comment which is on Natalie's presentation. So Chris is saying, interesting, when the marriage equality movement, evidence of success was needed about avoiding morality and a move to shared value narratives rather than this idea of morality. That's interesting. Rob says, what are the thoughts of the speakers regarding the Advertising Standard Authority's approach to pro-vegan advertising? Anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can make a comment on that. Yeah, it's a really good question. And the ASA has taken action to ban some advertising by pro-vegan organisations, which they judge to be too distressing. What I think is interesting here is one of the most complained about adverts in 2017 was a TV advert, a KFC TV advert, which featured a chicken dancing to rap. I don't know if people remember that. It received hundreds and hundreds of complaints from people saying that this was really distressing because this chicken was dancing on its way to be killed. It was really disrespectful. The ASA didn't take any action, and the reason that they gave was because it didn't feature any slaughterhouse footage, it didn't feature anything distressing, so therefore it was fine. And of course I understand the logic around that, but I think this really exposes the purpose of advertising. If you're going to allow an advert which has distressed hundreds of people and has received hundreds of complaints, but you allow it because it doesn't show that distressing the distressing footage, but then you ban an advert which these adverts they were never particularly graphic, these ones that were banned, but they do definitely try to make that link for people between the food that they're eating and I guess what Tom was talking about, trying to sort of connect with their empathy again by showing the animals in some of the real conditions that they live. I think that this really exposes the role of advertising, which is absolutely to distance us from the reality, isn't it? And the ASA judgments show that very clearly. So I guess that's sort of my comment on that it really shows the sort of the advertising is intended to be deceptive, is intended to conceal the truth, and that's how it works. And when it doesn't, people get incredibly upset about it.
One good positive was an ad that I featured in my slides, which was the humane myth is a lie, and the industry obviously really didn't like that and lobbied the ASA, but they upheld the ad, and that became really newsworthy. So I mean, I agree with Nicola, like most of the time, the ASA kind of rules in the industry's favour. This is one where they upheld and they actually said, milk is not humane. So that was quite groundbreaking, really. And I think this is like almost like a campaign in itself to, challenge misleading ads.
Absolutely. Do you want to comment on that, Aaron?
No, it's all right. I'll comment on the next thing.
Okay.
I was just wondering if we could pick and choose, because there was another question in the chat that was about farmers' livelihoods that I thought was quite important.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just working through the questions because we've got enough time. So hopefully we'll have.
Oh, right. Great. Well, if that one can come up later, that would be super.
Let me see if I can find it now. So that, yeah, okay, so that was Emma's question, that farmers are a key area that need to be addressed as livelihoods are perceived to be threatened by a diet switch. What are your suggestions or research that can be done to tackle this objection? And then I'll go to the question before that, after that. So Aaron, do you want to respond?
Yeah, just that it's really important not to be anti-farmer, and that to talk about a transition from meat farming to other forms of farming, and also to treat farmers with compassion, because they don't really want to take on these horrible industrial processes. They don't want to have a barn with 5,000 chickens in it, because they don't want to see the animals in pain, but they have to, because they're forced to by the economics of the industry. So those farmers would much prefer to be growing vegetables, growing mushrooms, just another kind of agriculture. And really, it's about the economics. And if we can make the economics work for farmers and help them with a transition to other forms of farming, then that's a very positive way of expressing it, rather than demonizing the farmers.
Yeah, I add to this, stock-free farming actually did some research, and they, surveyed a lot of farmers in the UK, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's very high, the number of farmers who would be willing to transition to plant-based farming if they were supported by the government in terms of subsidies and stuff. So farmers are willing to make this change. It's just the system isn't kind of set up to support them in that. And we're doing testing as well at the moment. We're at Animal Think Tank with an organisation called Animal Equality, who are working on a campaign called the Enforcement Campaign, which is basically, we have a lot of animal welfare laws in existence that aren't being enforced. And some of the messages we're testing are around this idea of future-proofing farmers' livelihoods. So we'll hopefully have some research we can share about that. But like Aaron said, it's absolutely like, farmers are part of the solution as well. They're not the enemy here at all. It's the kind of wider industrial kind of complex system.
Yeah, Julia's made a comment here that many farmers can't get the staff to work on their plant-based farms. And Nicola made the comment about the impact on workers' rights in a lot of the industrial farming and in the farming communities. So maybe there's an element of that involved as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to a question from Fran from Sustain, who says, in unhealthy food advertising, we often see big food companies targeting young people. Is there any research to indicate who the main meat target audience is? So you talked a little bit about this, Aaron. So do you want to respond initially?
Well, I mean, I surveyed an awful lot of advertisements, and they really are appealing to all ages. So it's not really, like vaping, which they try to go for the children. It really is all ages, but perhaps a slight orientation towards middle-aged people, because they see these as like the parents who will be buying the food and responsible for the food choices. So the representation of the parent is often, very strong to try and get those people to buy the food.
Anyone else want to comment around that? Okay. So Michelle's saying, what can we do together with Adfree Cities to support this campaign? Any thoughts?
Thanks for that question, Michelle, and hi. Yeah, I mean, this, like I said, this is sort of a new area for us, and we are sort of, I guess we're hoping to kind of open up a discussion on this. So we'd love to kind of talk about what comes next, really. Our sense is that this lies in exactly as Natalie and Aaron have both really described very well, that this lies in changing the narrative, doesn't it? So it's about changing the story. So we're really interested in looking more at that. I suppose in the more immediate, maybe your question is about more immediately. Do join ad block groups. We've got ad block groups in a growing number of cities around the country now. I can tell you where they are. There are groups, and these are all volunteer-led groups who are opposing advertising and running projects to showcase kind of positive alternatives. There are groups in Leeds, Birmingham, Norwich, Cardiff, Bristol, new groups in Manchester and Sheffield. We've got 3 in London. I'm sure I've left some out, but there are groups around the country who we support to take action on advertising. So do get in touch with a local group if you have a local group near you. And of course, we're always really happy to support people to start new adblock groups wherever you live. Don't underestimate how satisfying it is to prevent a billboard from going up in your local area. It's extremely satisfying. And that is a lot of what adblock groups are doing on a daily basis. So that's a really key way. Another key way is we've got an action on our website at the moment, which is writing to your MP to ask for a ban on high carbon advertising. And this can include advertising for meat and dairy as well, of course. And what we'd like to do in future, we haven't done this yet. We haven't done a sort of complaint to the ASA targeting meat, sort of misleading meat, egg or dairy advertising yet, but we would like to do that in future. So please do look out for that. Sign up to our newsletter. We send out emails once a month, which will have all those kind of actions in. If we can do these kind of like coordinated complaints to the ASA where people are sort of putting pressure regarding the same issues, then that helps the ASA to recognise these as issues and to introduce codes which address them and which give advertisers guidelines on how they shouldn't what they shouldn't be doing. So those are some ways in which you can support Adfree Cities and support this campaign and the adblock groups around the country who are working to prevent advertising. And you know, other things that you can do are talk to your councillor and your MPs as well. Do get in touch if you want like help or support with any of that. And our website on this has all the actions that you can take as well. The key thing I think to say though is that, yeah, like I say, this is new and for us, and we're really keen to collaborate on how we take this further. Yeah, and how we put some of what Natalie's been talking about into practice. I'm really excited about the prospects of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick thing for you, Natalie, from Fran. Could you share a link to that poll on British farmers that you just talked about? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I have done.
Charlotte, could I just address that question about YouTube? I just think it was important to pick up on it because it is quite a good question. Sorry, I don't know who the name of the person who made who asked the question was, but pointed out that we were using YouTube to show our videos, and YouTube is a platform which has advertising on it. It could use a different one. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Yeah, it's unfortunate, isn't it, that we kind of exist in this world where advertising is all around us, but and is on the platforms that we're using. Yeah, it's something that we could look at doing, and thank you very much for suggesting that.
Okay, Rob's made a point saying that Natalie brings up a good point about implementation deficits. Says that his past environmental research showed it being rife. For example, the current sewage discharge pollution is a product of the same thing. So Natalie, do you want to talk a little bit more about implementation deficits?
Is that in terms of like the government not supporting farmers in terms of plant-based subsidies? Is that the point that I made? I'm assuming it's that. But yeah, I mean, that's a really good comparison because the government is aware that, you know, with kind of raw sewage being dumped into rivers, the government's aware this is happening and nothing's really done about it. And the same is happening with factory farming as well. And, you know, there's a moratorium in Herefordshire on more factory farms being built because of like the Wye River just being polluted. But you know, there's obviously still all these thousands of factory farms that are still continuing to put all of this into the river. So it's, yeah, highlighting, we can approach this from many different angles, like highlighting that the government's kind of complicit in this and that more change needs to happen, and that, again, this is harming all of us beyond just the animals who are confined in these horrific places. It's, yeah, affecting humans, it's affecting the planet, it's affecting the animals who live in these rivers as well.
Yeah, Rob said it's because it's about the legislation not being implemented or being poorly implemented as well.
Yeah, oh sorry, so that was about the welfare enforcement. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so Claire has a question. Has anyone on the panel been researching precision fermentation as an alternative? I've read this can democratize the food system and provide the entire world's protein and fat needs on a landmass the size of Greater London. It is my understanding that the technology is there, but the biggest obstacle in making it a reality is changing public opinion. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so this is a slightly tricky issue because you have two different opinions about meat substitutes, so precision fermentation or lab-grown meat, or even just like plant-based burgers. So one opinion is that we should be promoting vegetables because vegetables already exist and they're easy to produce, and there's very delicious, healthy vegan meals in just about all cultures in the world. And so delicious, healthy food is right out there. And if we start to promote meat substitutes, then what we're doing is we're highlighting the supremacy of meat, that we have to have burgers, we have to have sausages, we have to have all of these meat products, but we're just going to swap and change to plant-based versions of them. But it's still reinforcing the message that these are the primary, most important kind of foods. So some people would argue that we should be actually promoting beans, and we should be promoting delicious vegan food rather than meat substitutes. But on the other hand, there are people who are arguing that we'll never displace meat, and that if we can produce something which is almost the same as meat, but is produced in a way that's environmentally friendly and kind to animals, then yes, we should be promoting that very, very strongly. But I do worry that because we've got these two counter arguments, that we're not going to make much progress on it. And I'd love to hear other people's opinion.
Nicola or Natalie, do you want to comment on those ideas?
Yeah, sure. I'm kind of like with Aaron, and like a bit ambivalent, like holding kind of both points of views, because I guess on the one hand it's this idea that technology is the answer, when in fact kind of technology and industry is kind of what got us into this situation, especially when you think of like the industrial scale of farming animals. But then equally, like, we are in the world that we live in, and some people are not just going to want to kind of cook from scratch and eat kind of vegetables and beans. I mean, I love that stuff, but not everyone will. So yeah, that is kind of, it could be a good stepping stone. I saw in the chat someone mentioned about the blue zones, and that's obviously kind of on Netflix, and I think that's really good for highlighting like the deliciousness and nutrition of plant-based foods that aren't heavily processed. But yeah, I kind of think there is a place for it, but it is not the be all and end all. We definitely should be promoting it as such, but there probably is a place for it.
Okay, and then just to link in with the talking about high carbon advertising ban, Julia's mentioned that in early October, the Green Party officially adopted a policy to ban high carbon advertising, which means that hopefully Green councillors would help to support local efforts around this. And yeah, we're working with a lot of Green councillors, and we hope that, ones in your local area would also be supportive. Robbie's got a difficult question, which is, how do we predict, preempt and avoid a culture war on this topic of banning advertising for meat, dairy and eggs, because it is so, kind of emotive? What are people's thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I think those two questions are so related to each other. So if you have like a ban on high carbon foods, which happens to include meat, then that kind of avoids the culture war. And this culture war, it's not really a war, because there is only one side that declares war. And it's a war on woke. And we've had this for such a long time. It was a war on political correctness, and then a war on woke. And it's also morphed into the war, for the motorist. Okay, it's the anti-motorist. And then they are coming to take your car away. They're coming to take your burgers away. And it's a very powerful right-wing way of discarding any messages which are actually just simply about being kind to other people and animals. I find myself talking about, low carbon, and therefore we shouldn't eat meat. And I feel really bad when I do that, because actually it's not about that. It's about these animals who are suffering terribly. But sometimes you just can't reach people like that. So dodging it by saying, let's get rid of these, high carbon adverts, that could be helpful.
I'd also say public research is really, really key to be like, what are people's fears around this? Like, how do we address these in a positive way? Because it's not just dismissing people's fears, but I guess it's also being mindful not to get pulled into the industry's like counterattacks and kind of reinforcing their narrative, but really pushing our values, our vision in a really positive way and showing how it does benefit everyone. But yeah, public research I think is key to understanding people's feelings around this.
Yeah, I think agree with all of that. Also, I think some backlash is unavoidable, isn't it? There's always going to be people who are going to be angry about the perception that their choices are being infringed and those, all of those kind of issues. I think absolutely, what Natalie said, it's about if we can focus on the sort of positives, the connecting the shared values, the positive stories, and also how this is, because I think we can turn that choice, we can try to turn that choice argument around, right? I think that advertising, this is partly why we're trying to do this work, to pick apart these tactics, to try and dismantle how it is that we're being influenced, so that we can see through it, which I think is a really empowering step, right? It's not a sort of removal of choice or disempowering. It's an empowering step to say, actually, what are the steps that we can now take now that we can see how advertising is manipulating us? So I guess that is the approach that I'm hoping that we can take, to focus on those positives, those shared values, and making it an empowering experience for people.
Great. Well, we're coming up to our time, so I think that's quite a good place to end. Thank you. Lex has just put in the chat something about Viva's response to the ASA ruling around vegan food, which is quite interesting actually, if people want to have a read of that, but I don't think we've got time to talk it through. And yeah, sorry about the other people that we might have missed, but yeah, thank you so much everybody for coming and taking part. Thank you to Ethical Consumer Week for having us back again. It's really great to have this space. And yeah, if you want to stay in touch, please do. If you want to find out more about Natalie and Aaron, please stay in touch with them as well. Sorry, what else was I supposed to say at the end? Yeah, you can find out more about their work. Oh, Natalie and Aaron, do you want to quickly say where people can find out more about your work?
Yeah, please feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat.
Great.
Yeah, I had it on my slide. You can check out animalthinktank.org.uk or email us at narrative@animalthinktank.org.uk. We'd love to hear from you.
Lovely, thank you. And if you've given us permission to contact you after the event, we'll also email you with any follow-up information that includes that, and also a link to the recording, which unfortunately will be on YouTube. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. And yeah, please do stay in touch and take these ideas out into the wider world. Okay, thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a really nice day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.